Hey everyone, Jake Lloyd-Bacon here.
Along with Paul Bianchi.
And Alexandra Hoy.
Hey, we all host different shows on Dragon Wagon Radio.
We do, but that's not what we're here to talk about.
Not at all. We are here to talk about Dungeons and Dragon Wagon,
a narrative podcast series in which we venture into a mythical land for a D&D inspired role-playing game.
Alexandra and I are joined by Matt Hinksman and a very special guest of quest for each chapter of an epic saga in which we must take on the roles of half-orcs, dark elves, and more as we fight our way through a fantastical land of peril, drama, and often hilarity.
All of which is controlled by me, the Dungeon Master, and the player's chance rolls of the die.
And our show is for everyone. Even if you know nothing about D&D or role-playing games, we've got you covered.
That's right. Our game sessions are highly edited, easy to follow, sound designed from top to bottom, and completely immersive.
Yeah, our episodes sound more like a well-produced radio drama than an RPG show.
So what are you waiting for? Join the adventure on Dungeons and Dragon Wagon at dndwpod.com or wherever you find great podcasts.
It's the greatest mystery in literary history. A divisive question with highly contested answers. Who was the writer behind the pen name William Shakespeare? Welcome to Don't Quill the Messenger. Here's your host, Stephen Sable.
And welcome back, Quillers, to another episode of Don't Quill the Messenger. So glad you can join us, and we thank you for always choosing us along with your other podcast listening experiences. We hope that you have, at least at some point, explored some of the other podcasts that are available on the Dragon Wagon Radio Network. We are proud to be a member of the Dragon Wagon Radio Network, and there are some other fine podcasts for you to listen there. If you haven't already explored that, you should. Today, we have a very special guest, and this episode is actually being recorded at the moment from the Turks and Caicos Islands, where I am sitting with a woman that you all, as fellow Quillers, know as Quiller Clare, and so excited to welcome her to the program and have a discussion with her about how she discovered the Shakespeare Authorship Question, Oxfordianism, and a few other little tidbits that we're going to share today. Thank you, Claire, and welcome.
Hello, Stephen. Lovely to be here.
So, Claire, just to give some of the listeners a little bit of background, you've been a listener of the podcast for quite some time now. You sent me an email and suggested a few episodes that I put into play. Mm-hmm. And that's how some of our listeners know your name, because I always give my listeners credit when they send me things in the mail or through email. So this is a good example for those who are listening who haven't reached out, if they want to contact me and either suggest an episode or request some extra information, or just to say hello or to give your comments and thoughts. You can reach me at contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com. contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com. And Claire, you reached out and you said you wanted more episodes that explained the autobiographical nature of some of the plays, which we have started sort of doing along the lines here and there, play by play. And we're going to continue to do that. But I always wondered, how did you find the Shakespeare Authorship Question? What first brought that to your attention?
Well, I've always been a doubter since I was a teenager that the man from Stratford wrote the plays. And gradually over the years, I've been reading different books and obviously came across Edward de Vere as the prime candidate. And being out here, I have an exercise bike that I like to get on every morning for an hour. And I got fed up of listening to music. I wanted to learn something. So I scrolled through Spotify accounts to find podcasts on educational sites, and lo and behold, up popped Don't Quill the Messenger, which was just my cup of tea.
And you found it under educational. That's funny because I don't know that we're very educational at all.
Oh, you are very educational.
We do try to be entertaining if we can be. So had you been a podcast listener prior to that? Did you have other podcasts in your retinue, as it were?
No, I didn't really know they existed. Until somebody told me, in fact, my husband said, well, why don't you listen to something else other than music? Like, what? He explained that there are all these podcasts out here, multiple topics that I can tune into.
That's great. And so would you do like an educational search? You didn't specifically search for Shakespeare. You just happened to find one that was based on
No,
Shakespeare.
I did look for Shakespeare, yes. Shakespeare Authorship.
So explain, if you could, a little bit about your background with Shakespeare. You said that since you were a teenager that you doubted that the Stratford man was the true author, but you have more of an attachment to Shakespeare than just an average, high school student or college student who learned about it in those areas, because I happen to know some secrets about you.
Oh, dear.
Yes. So you have a deeper attachment to Shakespeare, just like I have a deeper attachment to Shakespeare, and that's as a performer, right?
Yeah, absolutely, yes. Well, growing up in England, Shakespeare is imbued in our blood. We know him from a very early age. I remember going to Stratford-upon-Avon when I was 7 years old, dressed in my long frock, my mother's shawl, watching a production of Romeo and Juliet, and it was magic. And that was sold for me. I wanted to be a Shakespearean actress.
Mm-hmm.
But
So how did you pursue that? When did you pursue being an actress? Not at 7.
No. I carried on through high school and college, and then I went to Guildford School of Acting in London.
Okay.
And I studied more in classical acting. But it was just wonderful. And the more plays I read and performed in, it became apparent that the narrative that we've been given about the man from Stratford-upon-Avon writing the plays was just wrong. I think anyone with half a brain can see that, because nothing adds up. The wealth of information that Edward has, his intelligence, is all there in the plays. And the man from Stratford could not pick up on any of this because he was just a lowly country boy without an education, couldn't even write his name.
Now, being a Brit, do you find that if you have these conversations with fellow Brits that they get angry with you because Shakespeare is such an iconic British figure and he's part of the fabric of England?
They do. And they say, don't be so stupid. How can you say things like that? It's like, well, just read and understand a little bit more of the life and the history that was going on at the time. A lot of people would say, oh, well, he picked up these things because he would be drinking in a pub and talking to sailors that had just come back from the continent. That's how he knew all these wonderful things about Italy and France.
Yes, we commonly make the joke about the Mermaid Tavern of eternal knowledge.
Yeah.
Where he learned everything.
They think that that he was just such a genius that by sheer osmosis, he woke up one morning and he was fluent in Greek, Spanish, Italian, and the other languages that he can speak. But it doesn't make any sense. It's like, are you saying this to me with a straight face? I mean, you really do believe this?
And you didn't have that difficulty in overcoming that, bardolatry, as Mark Twain would have called it, in exploring the Shakespeare Authorship Question and seeking answers to your questions?
No, not at all. And Englishmen are very proud to have Shakespeare as their countryman. It's our history and our heritage. Everyone's very proud of that. But the point is that we as Oxfordians are not trying to take that away from England. We're not trying to say, oh gosh, God forbid, Edward was German or French or different nationality. He's still English. He's still our countryman. It's just you've got the wrong countryman.
Certainly,
wrong guy.
I like to think that when you lay the life of Edward de Vere over the top of the Shakespearean canon, or vice versa, lay the canon over his life, and you start filling in all of those questions, all of those puzzle pieces, and all of the answers start becoming clear as to how he had connections to the various people. I see it as being of such great historical importance to the Elizabethan age, and to understanding deeper the Elizabethan age and the Tudor dynasty. And I think that if we could convince people that if you embrace it that way, it enriches the English nature of the plays and how important they are to the history of England, rather than this sort of, miracle mythology that the guy just, invented it all from whole cloth and it popped into his head out of miraculous touch.
Yeah, absolutely.
But so as an actress, how many Shakespearean productions would you say that you have been in?
Oh my goodness. Well, I started in high school. Of course, everybody's been in their high school Shakespeare plays. And then I carried on through drama school. After that, in Las Vegas, I moved to Las Vegas in the early 90s. We set up something called the Las Vegas Shakespeare Company, later known as the Shakespeare Institute of Nevada. And we put on Macbeth and Hamlet, Midsummer Night's Dream. And then we did smaller taste scenes, we used to call them, so that if people weren't up to sitting through an entire Shakespeare play, but they were curious, wanted to hear some Shakespeare, see some Shakespeare, we would do lots of little scenes from the major plays to encourage people to come and enjoy that. That's
something that I have done many, many times throughout my history as a theater producer. It's sometimes what you find is you have to sort of, I say, white Zinfandel people into the Shakespearean canon. I say that white Zinfandel is sort of like an entryway wine. If you're trying to introduce people to wine drinking, you don't throw them a Malbec or a Zinfandel right off the bat.
Exactly.
Or all those, deep Cabernets. You start them with something a little lighter, a little sweeter, a little fun to drink, and then eventually they start to become a little more
curious.
And so those types of, evenings of Shakespeare, or we used to do a production quite frequently called For the Love of Shakespeare, and it was all Shakespeare's lovers, just scenes of the different lovers that we would perform, usually right around Valentine's Day, was always very popular, as you can imagine. And then people suddenly go, oh, I like this. Oh, I want to see more of this. One of the things I always say, and I'd like to see if you agree or not, is I think Shakespeare gets a bad reputation through poor performances of Shakespeare.
Oh gosh, yes, absolutely. How many children do we know that have grown up now and they absolutely despise Shakespeare? They hate Shakespeare because the teachers they had at school didn't understand it themselves, didn't like it, and they've grown up thinking, I hate it, I don't understand it.
It's unfortunate, and I think that it's sad because I don't think that that's true about any other playwright.
No.
If you go and you see a really terrible production of Streetcar Named Desire, you don't suddenly go, I hate Tennessee Williams and I'm never going to see another Tennessee Williams play as long as I live.
That's true.
But if you go to see a bad performance of Shakespeare, people don't, for some reason, they don't say, oh, that was a terrible performance, or that was a terrible production, or those actors were not good. They blame Shakespeare. I hate Shakespeare. Shakespeare's terrible. Yeah. So if you're one of those people, I would encourage you, fellow Quillers, to find quality performances of Shakespeare, and it will change your world. It will open you up to an entirely new level of appreciation, and you won't hate don't blame the playwright for bad producers. No, that's what I say.
That's true. And there's too many Shakespeare voices out there. They think actors think that, oh gosh, this is it. This is the big one. This is Shakespeare. So every line they deliver is done in a certain voice. It doesn't make sense what they're saying. You can't, as an audience member, understand what they're saying, but they're using the Shakespeare voice.
When I teach workshops, and I do regularly, in fact, I have another one scheduled in my local community where I live, I'll be teaching Tackling Shakespeare to some of the local actors there. And when I teach my classes, one of the first things I talk about is that it doesn't require an accent. It doesn't require extra bravado.
That's right.
It does require extra training and extra understanding of the text, certainly. but you can't fake your way through that by, putting on, as you say, well, this is my Shakespeare voice. And and like everybody's like, wait a minute,
No.
you sound like Patrick Stewart. That's not,
No.
that's not quite, only Patrick Stewart is allowed to sound like Patrick Stewart. Well, you have to have your own voice and do it your own way.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
what are some of your favorite roles that you have performed from the canon?
Oh, I love Lady Macbeth.
It's funny.
I love
'cause
her.
when you say that, because when you first wrote to me, I did a little Google search of you.
Oh dear.
Yes, I sleuthed
Oh, dear.
you. And one of the first things that
Just
popped
check.
up were some photos from your production in Las Vegas
Right.
as Lady Macbeth.
Yeah. I enjoyed doing her. She's just fascinating. Just all the quirkiness, the playing with, and now obviously learning the back history, the characters in real life that Edward based these plays on.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to replay Gertrude again, because we missed the mark. Now I realize, talking to you about the bedroom scene in Hamlet,
Mm-hmm.
and the director that I had was saying, let's make Gertrude pregnant, because she
I
was
don't
having an
understand
affair with Claudius. And okay, yes, it's not in the script, but I suppose it's a good enough interpretation when you don't really know why she married him so quickly. But you explained to me, yes, we do know why. And there was just one word in the script that talks about the election.
Mm-hmm.
Boom. She remarried and did all this for the sake of her son, to ensure that he would be the next king.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's pretty clear in the text. That's my interpretation anyway. And that's when I'm directing that play, that's how I always inform the actress playing Gertrude of those decisions and why she's made those decisions.
Correct. It just alters the whole dynamic of that scene now.
I think it's great. In fact, you're not the only actress that I've talked with. And of course, as a producer and director who directs so many plays from the canon and works with so many different actors, I always inform my productions from the Oxfordian position. I don't come into rehearsals and immediately say to actors, I'm an Oxfordian and this is going to be an Oxfordian production of Shakespeare, because that would be counterproductive. I just sort of let it come out through the rehearsal process based on, a question an actor might have about a line in the text, or about a character motivation, or why a certain scene is written a certain way. And I'll just start saying, well, the author intended this, or because of this moment in the author's life, this is being conveyed. And almost always at some point, one of them will go, I never read that about Shakespeare. I said, well, maybe you're not reading the right Shakespeare books.
Of course you didn't.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it's true that once, from a performer standpoint, once you are awakened, and I like to use that term because I think it's very apropos. Once you are awakened to the life of Edward de Vere as the true source. Yeah, we have all these sources, and we know what all the sources are from all the different books that he used to put these plays together. But the genuine source, the most important source of the plays, is his life. And once you recognize that, it does change your perspective of a play and of a character. And it does make you go, oh, I want to go back and play that
Yes.
role again.
Absolutely.
Oh, I was so wrong. Oh, I want to fix that. I want to change it. I've got to play this part again. And I think that's, some of the fun of it. It can be some of the tragedy of it too.
Yeah,
You look
right,
back
right.
at former performances and go, oh, that was terrible.
Yeah,
What were
no.
we thinking?
That was just, but yes, I agree.
So you find that let's go back to talking about the podcast.
Yes.
You find the podcast and you start listening. Did you start with like episode 1, or did you find it and look through and go, oh, this episode looks interesting, I think I'll start right there?
Yes, the latter. I chose what looked interesting to start with.
And which was the first episode you listened to? Do you recall? Can you remember?
Oh, heck. No.
No? How about some of the
remember.
first few?
Or the 101, Shakespeare 101
Sure,
from Hank, and the Dorothea Dickerman's, trip around Italy.
Yes.
That was fascinating.
Yes.
The Shakespeare Suppressed one.
Yes.
And the one about She Shall Not Be a Mother and the different relationships that the lady loves of Edward throughout the four ladies.
That's one of the
And,
more recent episodes.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh. Okay.
But I'm glad that you
But
enjoyed that
I
one.
remember it.
Sure.
I love it. Yeah.
Sure.
It's good.
So those are some of your favorites.
Yes.
Well, and we're very pleased that on May 5th, maybe it was May 4th, 2021, we were informed that we were honored for excellence in podcasts by the 27th Annual Communicator Awards for season 2, which was the 2020 season of 26 episodes.
Excellent.
So we're very pleased to add that feather to our cap.
All right.
And as I pointed out in a recent episode, Catherine Chilgen, who was the guest for the Shakespeare Suppressed episode, because that's the name of her book, that was the most popular episode of 2020. More listeners downloaded that episode and streamed that episode than any other episode for that season.
And I've got to mention Earl when he comes on.
Yes.
I love listening to him.
You like Earl?
Yes. Lovely voice.
I think everybody loves Earl.
Yes.
Earl's hard not to love. Yeah.
Yeah, send him out here.
He and my wife Annie, as you know, they have this like ongoing competition for who has been the guest the most episodes on the podcast. And I think he's the victor right now.
He's winning.
Yeah, he is. He's got her by at least one, maybe even 2 episodes now. So something exciting happened in relation to you reaching out to me. Not only the episodes that I was inspired to move forward with, including the one I did in, I believe, January 2021 about the problem plays. And then the most recent episode that featured Earl was an episode about Troilus and Cressida. So those episodes came out of your recommendation, but also that's when we started communicating back and forth about the podcast, about episodes. And then you were gracious enough to invite me out here to this wonderful tropical island that you live on. And that's why I'm sitting here with you right now doing this recording. But we also did something else that was very cool. And that is that you took the opportunity, having me here, to invite a group of people who live here on the island to come to your home and listen to a presentation on the Shakespeare Authorship Question, which we did just a couple of nights ago. And it turned out that it suddenly became a very popular thing, didn't it?
Yes. Everyone on the island was talking about our Shakespeare evening.
Tell me how that sort of came about. Like what first inspired you to go, hey, I'm going to invite a few friends over and see if Stephen would be willing to give a presentation?
Seeing the interest of my friends when I talk about this subject.
Mm-hmm.
When we were meeting for coffee one morning, it was when I'd first started writing to you and that knew that you were going to come over to visit. And I'm always chatting to them about Oxford and the subject. And they were very excited. And I said, well, if I could ask Stephen if he wouldn't mind doing a little talk one night, would you be interested? And they're like, yes, of course, yes. Oh, yeah, that would be so cool. Not that there's much to do on this island. And so having the opportunity for some culture and some intelligent conversation, they jumped to the chance of that. And it grew from there because I sent out invitations to the teachers at school as well and some of the older students. Mm-hmm. And with a potluck dinner for Cinco de Mayo. They brought all the food.
We called it Cinco de Shakespeare.
Yeah.
I think was what we were billing it as, and it sort of caught on, didn't it? Like
yes.
Then they told 2 friends, and then they told 2 friends, and suddenly we had a room of almost 30 people who were interested in learning more about this topic. And the reason I bring that up, and I'm going to ask you in a minute about some of the reactions of some of the people in the room. Because, they're going to tell me one thing. They're going to tell you something different, I think. Because they know you and they'll be more honest with you, I think. But the reason I bring that up is I want to encourage our fellow Quillers who are listening right now to consider doing something similar and to demonstrate how easy it is to do something like that. So not only is it simple to invite some friends over for a dinner party and say, hey, we're going to have a guest speaker, but you could take that even further than friends or a dinner party. And if you're a member of an organization like, let's say, a Rotary Club or a Kiwanis Club or some other philanthropic organization or volunteer group in your community, maybe you're a member of the Friends of the Library, or you have a church group that you attend regularly who might be interested in learning more about this. The Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship has a very expansive speakers bureau. And I'm just one of the available speakers. We have more than a dozen speakers available all over the country, all over the United States and in other countries as well. So if you are listening and you would like to book a speaker, odds are we have someone in your backyard who'd be willing to come to you and give a presentation to your group. If it's not possible to have a live presentation or book somebody to come directly, then of course we can always use technology, and we have Zoom available. And so you could even, maybe you're a member of a readers group. There've been a lot of different Zoom groups that have been created over the last year as people have found ways to connect with each other. And like, I know several friends who are members of acting Zoom troops now, where there are actors in different places all over the country, and they all connect at the same time and will read a play out loud together, or invite friends to tune in and listen to them read the play out loud together. And this is something that can be done just as well. So I know one of the people who attended the other night for our presentation was a local literature teacher for your local middle school.
Yes.
And so when I return home, I'm going to be in contact with him and be doing a Zoom presentation for his students in the coming weeks, because he was very intrigued by the authorship question, and he believed that his students needed to learn about this and know more about it. And so happy to do that. We have a speakers bureau that is very happy to do that, and it's free of charge to anyone who would like to book a presentation. So if you're interested in that, it's very easy to schedule. You just write an email to publicity@shakespeareoxfordfellowship.org. I know that's a really long email, but publicity@shakespeareoxfordfellowship.org. Shoot an email with your request, where you're located, the type of group you're interested in, whether you are interested in a live presentation or a Zoom presentation, and you can book a member of our speakers bureau. We can talk about things other than just Shakespeare Authorship Question 101, because we do have people like Dr. Earl Showerman, who is one of the members of our speakers bureau, who can talk about Shakespeare's knowledge of medicine. So maybe that's something that a group of people would be specifically interested in. Bonner Miller Cutting is more than willing to always talk about the Elizabethan wills of the time and how Shakespeare's will compares to other wills that she has studied, or the 1,000-pound annuity that was given to Edward de Vere during his lifetime by the Queen, and what we believe that money was used for and why it was spent. So there are very specific general topics that some of our Speakers Bureau members are also schooled in, whether it's the theatricality of the Shakespearean canon or it's Shakespeare and astronomy. So please reach out if you have a group that you would be interested in having a speaker for. Please reach out and we'll set that up. We're happy to do it. We like to spread the truth. Our goal, our mission as an organization is to continue to research this topic and to continue to share what we find with others who are interested in it. So here we were in the Turks and Caicos Islands delivering a presentation to a group of people who are now mostly expats who live here. And many of them were British, I found, which I thought was very interesting. And I have to tell you, I was a little bit nervous. It's the first time I had given a presentation of that nature in front of a bunch of Brits. I've given presentations plenty of times and on this topic as well, but never to people who are like, yeah, you're talking about our country. Yeah, that's our country. What do you know about it? What do you know about the history of England, you Yankee American? So how was it received? What kind of feedback have you had?
Everything positive, really. I'm not just saying that. You can look at my phone. I'm still getting texts saying, wow, that was awesome. That was brilliant. Oh, thank you so much for doing that. That we really enjoyed the presentation. And what I liked and what you did, Stephen, you didn't come in heavy hitter Edward de Vere straight away. You, in your beginning of your presentation, you just disproved the man from Stratford. You just showed how he could not have written these plays. And then when you've hooked them in with that, then you could say, but there's another guy who will fit the agenda a lot better. And that's when you introduced them to Edward. That was very, very cleverly done, I've got to say.
Well, thank you. I have to say that I have to give credit to several people who I did a Shakespeare with. I sort of stole some of their information, some of their presentation material, and also their guidance and advice. So the first person would be John Shahan of the Shakespeare Authorship Coalition, because John is a firm believer that the key to all of this and spreading this information further begins with disproving the Stratford man, that we must focus on taking that out of the equation first. And once you do that and people go, okay, once they agree it couldn't have been that guy, then they genuinely ask the question, well, if it wasn't that guy, who was it? And it's easier then, once they're curious as to who it could have been, to then insert, okay, here's who we believe it was. And so I have to credit John. And there's a great episode of the podcast where John was a guest as well. And we talk about the Declaration of Reasonable Doubt and the Shakespeare Authorship Coalition. And you can find information about that at doubtaboutwill.org, doubtaboutwill.org. And if you haven't signed the Declaration of Reasonable Doubt, Claire, you need to go there.
I have.
You already have? Okay, well, there you go.
Of course.
Very good. Well, hopefully some of your friends who attended the other evening will also join in and sign the declaration. So I have to credit John, because that's been one of his solid mantras for a very long time. And I would have to credit Bob Myers, who has a very extensive Shakespeare Authorship Question presentation that he delivers. I believe it's more than an hour long, up to 90 minutes long. And he was kind enough to share his presentation with our Speakers Bureau so that members of our Speakers Bureau could glean different pieces from his presentation. And so even a couple of my slides in my presentation are variations of slides from his presentation that I sort of lifted and incorporated in. And mainly in those first, in those first few moments where you're trying to explain the importance of understanding the Elizabethan age and how important that is to understanding why this happened and how this could have happened. And so I'm glad that you felt that was effective, because I took from some of the masters there.
Well, it worked. Definitely.
To make that work. And one of my favorite ones is the John Stubbs slide. And that I lifted from Bonner. Bonner has a great
Stubby.
Bonner has a great presentation about all of the torture and maiming and horrific things that happened to writers during Elizabeth's reign if they dared say anything untoward about the crown or politics. And it's a fascinating presentation when you look at John Stubbs is just one example of many writers who suffered the rack, as it were, for what they wrote, and then points out that not Shakespeare, never once. And so I think when I was delivering that information to the group in your home, I kind of watched them all. Like that really puts some light bulbs on in heads. You can really see people go, "Oh, wait a minute, what?"
Right.
Because you have to look at the Shakespearean canon and go, this guy was bold, Right? That's
Yes.
pretty bold, pretty risky, some of the stuff that he wrote about some of the members of high-ranking members of court. And to never be called in for it, never be punished for it, I think is just one of those lightning bolts, as we talked about afterwards. What other responses have you received from some of the folks who attended?
There was only one person that left with a negative saying, well, I'm not convinced.
That's okay.
I'm like, okay, that's fine. He says, because I asked him why, and he just said, well, I didn't see an alternative. When I asked him, well, did he, okay, if he doesn't believe that Edward is our guy, does he still believe that Stratford is the guy? And his answer was that I never saw an alternative. I'm like, okay.
I think I know exactly who you're talking about, too, because he sat through the entire presentation with his arms folded and a scowl on his face. And his poor wife, who I think was listening and kind of nodding and going, oh, well, that's interesting. And I think she was far more convinced than he was. And I'd hate to be in their bedroom later that night having a conversation about what they just saw, because it seemed to me like she was absorbing the information and he just was not having any of it.
He sat there with his February face and he wasn't taking it off.
But I admire him for enduring.
Yes.
And listening.
He came.
And not getting angry about it. No. And the irony, though, is I made myself available afterwards for any questions and answers, and he did not come. He didn't? He didn't come to me. He didn't ask me. He didn't challenge me. He didn't go, well, you said this and I believe that. Not at all. I was quite honestly a little disappointed because I thought, well, let's engage in some debate then. But no, he did not want to hear any more.
No.
And I think that they're just going to be people like that. They're going to be people who go, they're going to stick their fingers in their ears and go, la, 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 la. I'm not listening. I don't hear you. No, this isn't true. And you can't. There's not much you can do with that, right?
Yeah, it is as it is. It's what he's been taught. It's what's been taught for centuries, and he's not moving from that.
Yeah, his needle was firmly planted.
Fine. Yeah, but you said that Matt, Margarita Master Matt,
yes,
he was angry. You said, but not angry at you, but angry that his whole ideology had been torn down. This man from Stratford, who he always thought wrote these plays, is a fraud.
Those are the people that I have the most compassion for. The ones who are emotionally invested in the belief, and suddenly it all comes crashing down, and their rational mind tells them, "Oh no. This all makes total sense." And they do. I watched him, because, when you give a presentation, especially in a group as small as, 30 people, making eye contact is important. And you can judge where people are leaning forward because they're intrigued and interested, or where they're crossing their arms and leaning back and they're scowling. You can get a sense of whether you have your audience or you don't. And I watched him, and he was off sort of over in the back corner. And I could tell that he was upset, and I couldn't read whether he was upset at me, like the other guy, who was clearly upset that, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, or what was happening there. And it wasn't until I was able to speak with him afterwards, and he shared with me, and he said, I sat there and I got more and more upset because no one ever told me this, because no one ever shared these things with me. And one of the things I say in my presentation is I apologize to everyone in the room if suddenly some literature teacher from their past, whom they used to put on a pedestal, just got knocked off.
Right.
And that is very true for a lot of people. I think everyone has that one teacher in our lives that really awakened our desire to read great works. And not just Shakespeare, but other great works. I have a few of those in my past, English lit teachers mainly, who turned me on to magnificent books. And suddenly you go, oh, wait a minute. Professor Smith isn't as great and wonderful and smart as I thought he was. And all these years, I idolized him as this great professor in my past. And now I'm angry at him for never teaching me this. And I think that's where Matt was in his assessment of everything. And I was very pleased that he was willing to share that with me and be open about that with me, because it helped me to understand the reaction he was having. I don't think it meant that he was against what he learned, though. I think it was the opposite. I think it meant he was embracing what he'd learned.
Yeah.
And I think he might find himself more interested now and
I
might
think
even
so.
go listen to a few episodes
I think so, definitely.
of the podcast.
And I know definitely that some of the people there are listening to Don't Quill the Messenger now. They were when we first organized this, they were dreading their ignorance and like, oh my goodness, I've got to read some Shakespeare. I need to read up. I can't remember it. I'm like, no. This isn't you. We're not going to test you on the text. We're all right with that. We're going to just show you, or Stephen's going to guide you through the mystery behind all this, that the Stratford man that you've been told did not write Shakespeare. This is what the presentation is about. So then a couple of my friends did actually tune in to Don't Quill the Messenger just to know a bit about what you would be talking about.
In fact, so as people were gathering and arriving, it was interesting because one of your friends suddenly came running from across the room and she said, I recognize your voice. She'd been listening to some of the episodes. I heard this voice talking and I went, I know that voice. I've been listening to that voice on the podcast, which was very flattering in a lot of ways as well, but also just kind of cute because that's never happened to me before. I've had people say, oh, I saw you on stage, or I recognize you from a play that they'd seen me in. But that was a first. It was a first that somebody said, I recognize your voice. I know who you are.
Well, I'd already established that we were firm friends before we even physically met, because I hear your voice every morning at my house.
It's true. And that's how, when some of the listeners out there, when they write to me, they write very familiar terms. And I know it's because they feel like they know a part of me, and it's true. And all of you who are listening right now know this true. I'm just me. I don't really profess to be, some sort of genius scholar by any means. If anything, I always say, I'm an entertainer before I'm anything. But I am a genuine researcher into this. And I encourage all of you to continue to be genuine researchers into this. And together, through our research together, we'll find the answers and the discoveries that are there. And I make mistakes. I make jokes. I try to laugh off my errors on occasion. I invite my wife in to save me sometimes when I can.
You're not.
And so, it's just me, folks. And so glad that you choose to invite me into your living room, your kitchen, your exercise bike, your garden, or wherever it is that you listen to the podcast. We're pleased to be able to join you and to continue to share this great literary mystery with people. And it was very fun to share more details about it with your group of friends the other night, and hopefully made a few Oxfordian converts. And if not, if anything, just hopefully continue to encourage them to ask more questions about this topic. What would you say was my... This isn't me searching for compliments, but this is really seeking feedback so that when I give the presentation again, I can make some changes or better emphasize the high points. What would you say were some of the better points of the presentation that rung true with you and with others in the room?
I think when you, for example, you've just talked about the John Stubbs incident, when you pick on things that are so blatantly obvious that people can identify with, rather than throwing out highfalutin opinions or just by being grounded in disproving, like I said before, disproving Stratford, by picking apart his life, showing that he was illiterate, that his children and his parents were illiterate, and then comparing that to Edward and how an illiterate person like Stratford could not have written the plays, and then just taking little parts of his life, the grain hoarding, this great, wonderful author, this benevolent man, now is suddenly up in front of the courts for hoarding grain in time of famine. So it's all these little things. If you just juxtapose everything, it's just like, well, this is this example, but I'm going to give you a bigger one, a bigger example. That to me, I think, proved.
I do have concerns when I am delivering that part of the presentation, when I'm, quite honestly tearing the Stratford man down, and not as a person, just as not being the writer
of what he did, of his dealings, of who he
just
was.
the true facts that we have about him and what we know about him just do not match anything to do with these plays. And I do get concerns, and I was very concerned in that room, particularly because, full of a bunch of Brits there. And I'm like, okay, here's Saint Shakespeare, and I'm about to crush his halo. No. So I did have some concerns about that as I was delivering those details, but there's just no way around it.
Right.
I do think one of my favorite parts of the presentation, and one of the things that I use as a go-to when I'm talking to people about this and they're very new to it, is I use the daughters. I think the daughters scenario is a very solid one. And in my presentation, I specifically sort of come back full circle at the end to Edward's daughters, right? And so when you start with the Stratford man and his daughters, and the fact that he didn't teach them to read and write, that he leaves all of his goods to their husbands, not to them, the way he treats his wife in his will, and we see this, very paternal and patriarchal and misogynist guy through that. And then when you come back around full circle and you see how the first folio gets published through these two men, one who was almost the husband of one daughter and who is the husband of another daughter of Edward de Vere, and you see that Elizabeth and Susan de Vere must have played a role in this first folio being published, and then you connect the dots, that seems very clear that, well, then they must have had access to their father's writings in order to make that happen. And the juxtaposition between this man and his relationship with his daughters and this man and his relationship with his daughters is so wide. And that really sticks out with people, I think, in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And especially when you point out characters like Juliet, who clearly stands up to her father in tremendous, what would have been unheard of ways in that period of time. When you look at Portia, who dresses and becomes a lawyer, a doctor of the law, and so empowered. And when you look at Rosalind, his largest female role, the way he paints Cleopatra. When you look at all these magnificent female roles, Beatrice, who is like, I'm not going to tie myself to any man. I don't need a man. Forget that. And is so revered by all the other characters in that play, Much Ado About Nothing. She's really the hero. Hero is not the hero. Beatrice is the hero of that play, small h. And you think, to not share those characters with your own daughters, as a father of two daughters, I'm already sharing those characters with my daughters in some of the, children's versions, books and scripts and condensed and cartoon versions and whatnot, because I want them to grow up to know those women, to be like those women. And then you look at, Stratford, and
Well,
I think that's
he
a huge
didn't have
one.
that opinion of women, period.
Yeah.
So how could he have written about those women?
Not
He couldn't have
possible.
done because no, not possible.
I think that's one of the reasons why I really loved one of the recent episodes. And if you're listening and you haven't found the episode with Dorothea Dickerman about the loves of Shakespeare, the four influential women in Edward's life, that I think clearly help inform the canon in so many ways. That's another one of my favorite episodes.
And I think something to your credit as well in the presentation was your knowledge and understanding of English history. If you hadn't put that across and the English people sitting there could see and hear that you knew what you were talking about, you understood the time. Therefore, you're not just some Yankee Doodle coming over saying this, and this, and dismissing everything, but without any background. So that was very important, and that came across
It made me feel
really
very
well.
pretentious. I have to tell
Heck, we can't even remember Charles. Which one? James? How many? They're all called Henry. Edward, Henry, Richard. They're all. Well, you get lost.
And I truly, one of the reasons why I have the knowledge of English history that I do have is thanks to Shakespeare.
Right.
And then you learn that certain parts of certain plays are, very elaborate. He takes, a lot of poetic license and elaborates here and there for propagandic reasons, I believe, truly. And you find out that, okay, well, that's not quite historically accurate. And, all writers do that. That's a very common thing. But truly, when you start to recognize that certain characters are based on certain real life people, then you want to go read about those real life people to better understand those characters. And that's particularly the theater artist in me. When you are going to play a role or you're directing a play that has characters in it that are based on real people, then of course it behooves you to go study the real person to help inform the direction or the characterization that you're going to portray. Very recently, I portrayed an actor by the name of William Gillette, an American actor who was one of the first actors to personify Sherlock Holmes upon the stage. And the play was written by a modern American playwright named Ken Ludwig, in very modern times, set in a time when Gillette lived. And so, of course, you're going to go study the real William Gillette. If you're going to be playing a man who actually lived, you want to study something about him. And you discover that Ken Ludwig took a lot of poetic license and that, it's a fictional play based on a real person. But it helped me to personify that real person by knowing more about him and the life that he led. So I think that that's helped inform my English history because I want to know something about Christopher Hatton when I am doing Twelfth Night and somebody has to play the role of Malvolio, for instance, is just one example.
But don't you think that as well, that's history and English departments at colleges, schools, whatever, need to work closer together because there's so much that historians can learn from Shakespeare of the history of the times, just the little nuances that are going on at court and why this whole thing happened in the first place, that Edward had to conceal his true identity. At the same time, English departments need to understand more of the history of the time to acknowledge and understand what Edward is writing about.
Certainly, I absolutely agree. And I think that's going to be one of the keys to further advancing these truths and the Oxfordian movement is by reaching out to more historians rather than literature majors. I think that you're right. So if you connect Edward to any play, choose a play, doesn't matter which one. If you connect him to that play, and then you start to analyze the other people of the Elizabethan court who are also personified in that play. And you suddenly start understanding some of the subtle internal jokes or points that are being made or the political statements that are being made in relation to those people and what's happening in their lives at the time. I think it also helps date the plays.
Yes.
much easier. But also, I think from a historical perspective, as a historian, you go, oh, there was this great debate going on between courtiers over this particular aspect of political thinking or over this particular incident that occurred at court. And it's all there in these plays. They're actually history books in an interesting sort of way, in that they take these historical figures and moments and then in many cases, satirize them upon the stage. But in other cases, give this like veiled interpretation of what's going on at the time. And I think you're right. Historians should embrace that and would find a wealth of information there.
And I was surprised as well that we didn't have a lot of whys. Why? Why did this happen? Why did Shakespeare from Stratford take off as the bard, the author? Which, to me, I'm a why person. And I think that was one of the first questions I wrote to you,
Yes,
saying, well,
it
what
is.
do you think was the reason? But there isn't a definitive why out there yet. Lots of people have skirted around the issue, and we're dancing around, and we're so close, but we just haven't found that missing link yet. Some authors will say, for example, that, we talked about this, that the reason Edward did it was to take his name away so that nobody would discredit the Cecil family in future, because they were ridiculed so highly in the plays. And he did that for the sake of saving his son's life. Well, that doesn't quite rub with me, because that's a life for a joke. It just, that doesn't reach. Then we have other researchers, authors that will say, well, again, it's related to Southampton in the Tower, that Edward decided, okay, I will take my name off the plays because I'll shut up and I won't go on anymore about Southampton being the next in line for the throne.
Mm-hmm.
But again, that doesn't quite rub with me, because they already knew who Southampton was. The sonnets were out there, the poems. Already, they knew that Southampton was a prince. Courtiers knew that. It wasn't a secret. So by Edward taking his name away from that, what did that do?
So, and you're talking about, the reason why his name is not on the first folio.
Yes.
And why we end up with this, floating head.
Right.
I like to call
Yes.
I like to call the
floating head on the
Drochet
platter.
engraving the floating head cartoon version of.
Yes. Why?
So I agree with you that I think that the why is a huge important question, and I think that we need to be, as researchers, as scholars, I think we need to be focusing on answering that question more than anything.
Yeah.
And I would like to see some of the top minds of this movement come together and agree on a course of action
Absolutely.
to get to the bottom of some of those answers. Now, it may mean that it may result in nothing but continual failure at answering the why, but it may not. But if we were to at least put some focus of attention, energy, resources towards that common goal of getting to the why, I think you're right. I think we would convince a lot more people.
I don't think, I don't think the Oxfordian movement, we're not being taken completely seriously yet, because we don't agree on certain things. Different researchers are coming up, well, know this or know that. Even though all the other evidence that Edward de Vere wrote those plays is out there, his life is embedded in those plays. People that he knew are in those plays. But because we can't solve that one simple little question, we're not taken seriously.
Well, I think you're right there, and I think it's part of the double-edged sword of the beauty of the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship as an organization, in that the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship, one of the things I love about being a member of SOF is it reminds me of being a member of the theater. The theater is accepting of all.
Right.
We take all comers. We it's the land of misfit toys. I always say backstage at any production, because I know so many theater artists who came to theater because they didn't fit in anywhere else. But they fit in here. Just recently, the most recent production that we did, we had a lighting assistant came to us, a young lady who is still in high school, but who wanted to learn. And in theater, we have tradition of one of the traditions that I like to propagate is that we have circle before performances. But also, we always have notes after rehearsals, right? As you know.
Yeah.
And notes isn't always just a place to give corrections. It's also a time to acknowledge great work and to point out above the call of duty that people are doing to add to the production. And there was one night at Notes where this young lady just, chimed in and said, I just want to thank you all for being so welcoming to me and for giving me a place to be and feeling like family and a home. And I love this, and I'm going to do this forever now. And that's the type of thing that we love to hear in the theater, of course. And I feel like SOF is very much like that. And we have an acceptance of all thoughts, all ideas, all research. There's no such thing as a bad question, right?
No.
We truly are. When here I say every 2 weeks, I say, keep asking questions, and we mean it. Bring your questions. We want to know. And the more we question, the more answers we will find. And that's wonderful. But you're right. There is a double-edged sword to that. And that is that we don't have a cohesive narrative. And that's something that Justice John Paul Stevens pointed out, as a skeptic, was that he felt that the hardest task we had to conquer was coming up with a cohesive narrative. And that's a legal mind going, well, if you don't tell me how the crime was committed, I can't convict the guy of the crime, was sort of his way of pointing at it.
Makes sense.
And I think he's right. And I think that's something we really do need to focus on. As more and more people come to this movement, hopefully more and more people will draw that as their focus and will be at least able to put together sort of a better cohesive timeline and reason for that timeline that will then ultimately convict Edward de Vere of the crimes of writing the works of Shakespeare.
Oh, we're so close. I know that. You know what? I think if anyone will find it, it'll be Hank.
You think Hank
Whittemore,
okay, Hank, if you're listening, Hank Whittemore.
He's going to find it.
Quiller Clare says it's up to you to find the answer.
Find the why. Well, I mean, his monument is absolutely amazing. Terrific.
I remember you writing to me when you received that book and going, okay, I'm going to be busy for a while. Don't recommend any more books to me until...
Goodness, the research that he's done, every single word in the sonnets, he's taken and referenced the plays where Edward mentions different plays, mentions that particular type of phrase so that he can make it make sense in the sonnet. Now we know what he's talking about, now what he's pertaining to. It's fascinating, and he's done so much research. I mean, I read some of those sonnets, and especially the Dark Lady sonnets, and I'm like, what the bloody hell is he talking about?
So that's definitely not one that I recommend to newcomers. It's a very intimidating volume. It really is. I think that anyone who finds themselves fascinated with this mystery definitely needs to add that to their library.
He's written a little small one, though. Is it called Shakespeare's Son or something, which is basically explaining the monument, the sonnet thing that we're talking about, but in a much smaller volume.
Yes,
put together.
Yes, there is. But what I've seen your library that is growing, just like all of us. Our libraries continue to grow and grow and grow. It started off as one shelf on a bookshelf.
Yeah.
Now it's an entire bookshelf. My wife says, you're going to need another bookshelf if you keep this up. I said, yes, I know. She said, where are you going to put it? I said, I don't know yet.
Build a new outhouse extension.
Right. But what would you say? Because I know I have my opinion on like what the best books are, the greatest books are the ones that I give to people or introduce people to early on? What would you say are some of the ones that newcomers who are just discovering this question and who are enjoying the podcast but now want to start reading? What would you turn them to?
Well, the big book that I read was the Mark Anderson book, but that's a really big fat book. So if you're first starting out curious, you might not want to delve into such a huge volume. But that is incredible. That's basically turned me on to the Edward de Vere authorship. Oh, there's the one by Diana Price. I love that. What's it called? I've got it. We were looking at it this morning.
Unauthorized biography, right. I think.
Yes, that is brilliant. But the thing is, there's so many different. I read one, the Shakespeare Fraud by Ted Story, and I'm like, wow, this is fascinating. But you have to start to cross-reference the books, and you never actually hear things repeated. Like Mr. Story does actually say that Elizabeth gave birth to at least 5 children.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
so
a stretch.
I'm like, well, yes. I know you say it was just Southampton.
Yeah, that's my belief. Yes,
but she did have a child though.
And
much
there are
when
some
she
who
was
say
younger.
no. She had at least 2 children. Here's what I think we can say is enough people believe that she was a mother to at least 1 child that we should now be trying very hard to figure out who that child was. Or if more than one, who those children were, because I think that would answer a lot of the whys. If enough of us believe that she gave secret birth, then what we need to be doing is finding out what happened to those children or child. Absolutely.
But we know that she gave birth when she was 12 or something like that from Thomas Seymour.
That's what some people believe, yeah.
Because she gave that away herself. She wrote letters to William Burleigh saying, I know there are rumors about me being pregnant, but they're not true.
Where do you find that?
Well, there weren't any rumors that she was pregnant. She gave it away herself. It was one of those books. I can't remember which one.
So, Mark's book, Shakespeare by Another Name, Diana Price, unauthorized biography.
Yes. I love reading Richard Rowe's Italy.
Shakespeare's Guide to Italy.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. Well, we had a conversation the other night about how I keep trying to plan an Oxfordian tour of Italy.
Yes, well, we know what happens when you
make derailed.
When you make a plan to go to Italy, we know what happens.
Yes, we do. Yes, at least twice now, we've been derailed by the coming of a baby.
Yeah.
So, but I think that might have come to an end now.
We have
never say
3.
never.
We have our 3, and we're very happy with our 3. I think we're done.
But yes, that is an amazing book because, again, he doesn't go on about it's got to be Edward de Vere. He just shows that the man that wrote these plays had to have stood in these places and seen with his own eyes, not learnt from sailors coming back from the continent because they would not have been exposed to the painting with the bonnet.
Titian.
Yes.
Yeah,
Sorry,
Titian's painting of Venus and Adonis.
Right.
And I include that slide in my presentation.
Yes.
And one of your guests is an Italian expat.
Yeah.
And she immediately jumped on that. And I watched her. She was on her phone through a lot of my presentation. And I thought, oh, she's tuned out. She's complete. I've lost that audience member. And then afterwards, she came to me and she said, I started researching everything you were talking about. So she was sitting there. She was very engaged. She was sitting there rabbit holing and doing her own research right there in the middle of it.
She was sending them to me.
Yeah. She said, I sent Claire the links to this and to that and to the other thing, and she was like, yes, that painting is at, and she started rattling off, and she's from there, so she knew exactly the locations and whatnot, and that was fascinating. I was like, oh, I didn't lose her at all. She was diving deep.
Yeah.
So that was actually very rewarding and very fun. Well, Claire, I want to take the opportunity to thank you so much for being such a loyal listener, for reaching out the way that you did with your recommendations of episodes, because we love to receive recommendations for episodes. And I want to remind everybody listening, if you have a recommendation, if you have a comment, maybe you would just like to drop me a line to say hello. Maybe you have a favorite episode. You would like me to pass it on to that guest to share with them how much you enjoyed their episode. I do that. I'll do that for you. Many of our guests will respond to you as well. So if there's a special guest, special episode that speaks near and dear to you and you'd like to reach out to that person, I can pass that on for you as well. If you have criticism, if there's something that you think that we could do better or that we should fix, we'd like to hear those too. So please send an email to contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com. contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com. Love to hear from you. And well, thank you, Claire, for taking the opportunity to reach out. And then look what's become of it. So here we are now. We're fast friends.
Indeed.
And I want to thank you for inviting my wife and I to your lovely home on this beautiful island. We've had a magnificent stay here.
We're not finished here, though. Next year, we need to bring some Shakespeare.
I am all about that. I am more than willing to put together a series of scenes, monologues from Shakespeare with some of my skilled actors and actresses and bring them here to the island to further delight your guests. I want to thank you for inviting them all to listen to my presentation and help spread the word. I'm certain, based on the reactions that I received, that there were genuine reactions there of people who are now going to become fellow Quillers and fellow Oxfordians. And, I always like to say, that's our job. Convert the world one at a time, one Oxfordian at a time. Of course, I'd always encourage you to share the podcast with friends, especially if you know they're already podcast listeners, that they enjoy podcasts. Just ask them to add this one to their list and to put it on their phone to receive alerts when new episodes come out. As you know, we have a new episode every 2 weeks. And we look forward to continuing that tradition. We're pleased, as I mentioned earlier in this episode, to have been recognized for our excellence as a series in the documentary category for the 27th Annual Communicator Awards. And you helped make that happen, all of you, by supporting the program and by being loyal Quillers. So please go to ShakespeareOxfordFellowship.org. It is your source and resource for everything Shakespeare Authorship Question. I'm your host, Stephen Sable. Thank you for joining us today on Don't Quill the Messenger. And remember, keep asking questions.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a rating and review in your podcast player. For even more, visit our website, don'tquillthepodcast.com. There you can find official merchandise in our shop, as well as a link to our Patreon. This show is made possible by people like you. We hope you'll consider showing your support by becoming a monthly patron, where you'll receive bonus material and tons of exclusive perks. You can also join in the conversation on our Discord and by following us at Don't Quill the Pod on all social media. All of this can be found at don'tquillthepodcast.com, don'tquillthepodcast.com.
Dragon Wagon.